The air in the courtroom was thick with tension, and the walls seemed to close in on Charles. His hands were shackled, but the weight of the chains felt nothing compared to the weight of the situation. He had been sitting here for what felt like hours, weeks, even, and every glance from the jury, every whisper in the crowd, confirmed it. The verdict was already decided. Guilty. Charles could see it in their eyes. No one believed him. No one cared about the truth. They had decided long ago that he was guilty, and no amount of pleading or evidence could change that. The prosecutor, a lean man with sharp eyes and a quicker tongue, stood tall at the podium. He was relentless, weaving his arguments with such precision that Charles felt like a fly caught in a web. The prosecutor painted a picture of a man with a criminal past, a man who had always been on the wrong side of the law. But that wasn't him. Charles had never been the type to hurt anyone, let alone commit the crime they accused him of. Yet here he was, trapped by a system that had already decided his fate. The judge, his face a mask of neutrality, barely glanced at Charles as he spoke. The man's indifference was almost palpable, as if this case was just another mundane task in a long line of cases. Charles swallowed hard. His mother's face flashed before his eyes, her steady eyes always so full of hope for him. He remembered how she had always told him, "You'll prove them wrong, son. They can't take your dignity." But what if she was wrong? What if this time, the world was too big, too unforgiving? Just as Charles's thoughts began to spiral, something unexpected happened. The door to the courtroom opened with a soft creak, and all eyes turned. A figure stood in the doorway. It was a man in a trench coat. His hair was graying at the temples, but his posture was firm, purposeful. His presence was commanding, an unspoken declaration that he was someone who had come to make a difference. The figure was a detective. Detective Lucas Reed. Charles froze. He had seen Reed before. Not as a witness, but as a foe. Lucas Reed had been the one to interrogate him years ago when the police first came to arrest him. He had been relentless then, his words like daggers, dispassionate, cold. Reed had been a crucial part of the case against Charles, someone who had made sure Charles's future looked bleak. Now, he was here. On the other side. "Your Honor," Reed spoke, his voice strong and unwavering. "I have new evidence." The courtroom murmured, and Charles's heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the change he had been waiting for. Reed's words could be the salvation he had hoped for. Reed continued, walking toward the stand with a sense of authority. The prosecutor's face hardened, but Reed didn't flinch. "I have reason to believe Charles didn't commit the crime he's being accused of," Reed said, his eyes briefly meeting Charles's. "In fact, I know he didn't." There was a shift in the room, like a storm was about to break. The judge narrowed his eyes. The jury shifted in their seats. Charles's heart raced. He wasn't alone. For the first time since his arrest, Charles felt something he hadn't dared to feel in months: hope. But as Reed spoke, the truth that he revealed was more shocking than anything Charles could have imagined. Reed's words hit harder than any blow Charles had ever taken. They set him up, Reed's voice rang out, shaking the courtroom to its core. Charles has been framed. The evidence against him was fabricated by someone who should have been his ally. The prosecutor's eyes widened in disbelief. Reed turned to face the stunned jury. The defense lawyer representing Charles, Benjamin Foster, was compromised. He was paid off by corrupt judges to make sure this case ended in a conviction. Every piece of evidence you've seen, every argument made by the defense, was carefully manipulated to steer this case in one direction: guilty. Charles's mind couldn't process what he was hearing. He couldn't fathom how this could be true. Benjamin Foster, the man who had been his defender, had been his enemy all along. The man who was supposed to protect him had been the one to help ruin his life. The weight of that realization crushed him. He turned to look at Reed, whose gaze was steady and unflinching. Reed was holding the cards now: evidence, documents, phone records, everything that proved Foster's involvement. But it wasn't just Foster's betrayal that stunned Charles. It was the truth behind it, the truth that some of the most powerful men in the court system had been part of a larger, more insidious plan. Reed continued to speak, his voice unwavering. The entire case against Charles was engineered. They took a man who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time and used him to cover up their own crimes. The prosecutor stepped forward, clearly flustered. This is absurd. These are baseless accusations. But Reed stood his ground. These accusations are anything but baseless. I have the receipts, the emails, the bank transfers. Everything you need to see the truth for yourself. And the courtroom descended into chaos. People jumped to their feet. Lawyers argued. The jury was in an uproar, trying to process what they had just heard. Charles felt a wave of nausea wash over him. Everything he had known, everything he had believed about his case, was all a lie. The courtroom was no longer a place of justice. It had become a battlefield. And Charles was caught in the middle. The days following Reed's testimony were a blur. The courtroom was flooded with new evidence, phone records, witness statements, documents linking Foster to the corrupt judges who had orchestrated the entire thing. Charles's mind reeled with the weight of it all. The world he had known for the past year, the world of his trial, his prison, his life being taken away from him, had all been a constructed illusion. In the midst of it all, the most powerful revelation came from Foster himself. On the third day of the trial, he was arrested. The corruption had gone deeper than anyone had known. And as it unfolded, it became clear that Foster was only one small piece of the puzzle. The web of deception, of betrayal, spread far and wide, and soon, the true faces of the men who had orchestrated the setup were exposed. Charles stood in the courtroom, watching the destruction of the system that had nearly crushed him. As the judge announced that all charges against Charles were dropped, a hush fell over the room. The gavel came down. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Charles felt the weight of the chains that had bound him lift. He had been wronged. But he had been heard. And in the end, truth had won. Charles walked out of the courthouse a free man, but his mind remained haunted by the reality of everything that had transpired. The shock of Reed's revelation, the chaos in the courtroom, the image of Benjamin Foster being led away in handcuffs, it would all stay with him forever. But as he walked into the future, he knew one thing for sure. He would never let anyone, no matter their skin, their power, or their title, take his freedom again.